to stop before we finished it, but I told you, remember, it was okay because the chapter ends on a cliffhanger anyway. And you just move right in, as we'll see this morning. Just going back to remind us all of the situation. Paul has finally reached Jerusalem with his group. They have the contribution that Paul has worked so hard to get the Gentile congregations to raise. They reached Jerusalem, turned the funds over to the church there. The leaders came up with that great plan to resolve the issue with Jewish Christians that had come into the church there in Jerusalem and were still very zealous, as the leaders of the church then put it, for the law of Moses as well. And we'll see again this morning that you could be a Jew and a Christian. And I know that sounds funny when I say it that way, but as we watch this unfold this morning, we're gonna follow uh, that thread quite a bit. So, but remember that as we got toward the end of class last week, we were seeing the opportunity that Paul took to go in and pay that money for those four men who had taken the Nazarite vow. It's the last of the days, so it looks like everything's okay. And then some of the Jews from Ephesus recognized Paul there in the temple. Of course, he had preached there 3 years and been the center of a great deal of controversy there as well. And because they had seen him around the city with Trophimus, who was a Gentile, they jumped to the assumption that he had Trophimus with him there in the men's court where only the Hebrew men could go, and they started that riot. And of course, their real motivation was simply what? Kill Paul. They want to kill Paul. We'll see again this morning how bad they want to kill him, but they jump on him. They call the crowd to their aid. Most of the crowd doesn't even know why they're murdering Paul, but that's exactly what is happening. But the commander of the fortress there, Antonio, that was on the corner of the temple grounds, he gets a message that all of Jerusalem is in riot. And so he rushes out there, sees them murdering Paul, orders Paul to be bound. And then in that last part we were looking at last week, uh, the soldiers at first have him, as we said, double bound. They got two chains on him. As they try and take him out of there, uh, the crowd gets so bad they literally have to pick Paul up. So they're kind of crowd surfing with him through that mob, and then the rest of the soldiers are having to make a protective shield around them while they carry him up. And as they carry him away, they're still calling for Paul's death. If you look at your text there, you'll see probably something akin to away with this man, but that literally means to kill him. If you go back and you look in the gospel accounts, when they called for the death of Christ, they were saying the exact same thing to Pilate. They were away with this man, away with such a person. So um, we're going to pick up our text in verse 37 there. As Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the commander, "May I say something to you?" And he said, "Do you know Greek? Then you are not the Egyptian who some time ago stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness?" But Paul said, "I am a Jew of Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no insignificant city, and I beg you, allow me to speak to the people." When he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the stairs, motioned to the people with his hand, and when there was a great hush, he spoke to them in the Hebrew dialect, saying, All right, so that's the end of the chapter. I've got several questions here to help us appreciate what is happening here. So, where is Paul when he asked the commander? On his way up the steps. Yeah, he is on the stairs. The commander was trying to get him outside uh, and safe in the fortress. As they climb those stairs, of course, they're gaining a measure of security because they have those hundreds of soldiers at the bottom. They got, of course, the remainder in the fort. The word that's used, my version translates commander here, is the word that meant someone who had 1,000 men under his command, right? The Chiliard. Uh, and so we saw last week he rushed out probably with around 400 or 500 men. So you can picture them having got him to a measure of safety on these stairs that Paul asked this question. What is it about the request that puzzles Claudius? The language. His language. Paul asked his question of this Roman commander in fluent Greek. Yeah. And I heard Bob say, who is he assuming Paul is? He assuming that he is this Egyptian Jew that sometime back had raised a following. He promised that following, and I'm giving you obviously some of the historical details. Luke is more brief. Uh, but he had raised a following. You see that expression there, men of the dagger? That's a Greek word for a specific group. That group, a group of assassins, they were known for killing people with their daggers, which is why they got that name. But they would be in a crowd situation, strike out at someone that in their zeal for Israel and Israel's freedom, they would murder that person very, very subtly as far as the crowd, put the dagger right back under, and then just start the outcry or join in it if it's already started that, hey, murder's going on here and everything. And so an Egyptian had been leading this group. He had taken them up to march on Jerusalem. He told them that when he gave the signal, the walls would fall down, just like Jericho, and they would go in. But of course, the walls didn't fall down. His followers got massacred, and he hightailed it off. That had been about 3 or 4 years before this scene with Paul. So you can understand the commander a little bit. All he knows is that there was some person in the Jewish temple that the mob hates so much they're literally trying to beat him to death, even after his guards have come. They try and persist and everything. So his mind goes to who would be the Jews' number one enemy right now that could waltz into their temple. And so that's why he jumps to that assumption like that. But of course, not accurate. Uh, who was it the Egyptian had fooled?
The Jews.
The Jews. Why do I ask that question here? What am I trying to get you to think about? How long ago was it?
3 or 4 years.
So what does that mean?
That was the time of.
It's still something that's fresh on their mind. This group of people among these Jews would be people who had followed the Egyptian or hoped that the Egyptian would prove to be a liberator and all of these things. So that is all part of that circumstance. What does Paul tell the commander about himself in response to, hey, it's obviously you're not this Egyptian guy I thought you were.
He tells them
He's a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, not an Egyptian.
4 things that he told him, and each one of them it is significant to note. So he is this Jew of Tarsus and Cilicia. He is a citizen of that city. Now, one of the things that is important to know about Tarsus here uh, is that under the Roman Empire, they were a free city. Uh, the coins we have from there, the Roman coins have this stamp on them, Metropolis Autonomous, which was the legal status given to a free city. Uh, Back in Julius Caesar's day, he had made them a free city because they helped him when he marched on Egypt. And then they did some favors for Caesar Augustus later, and they kept that status. Uh, and remember, we talked about Paul's origins. We talked about what a great city Tarsus was, how it was the third or fourth city education wise in the ancient world, and how it had all that wealth and trade and commerce and all of these things. So you're being told this about this conversation so that you can follow the mind of the commander. He has been thinking he has, a scum of the earth guy, literally. Of course, you can imagine what Paul looks like at this point. The crowd had had free access to him for some time and been trying to beat him to death. I imagine he looks a little disreputable at this point and everything. And someone the Jews consider their number one enemy. And so he's thinking that. And yet, when Paul asks his question, it's clear that here is an educated man. If this man is a citizen of Tarsus, then that meant he, to be a citizen of Tarsus, was a status in itself. So it meant he was someone with wealth and family and influence in that region. So the commander was just completely thrown off guard there by those things. Uh, did being a citizen of Tarsus make Paul a Roman citizen? I thought maybe I better make that clear because the tossing back and forth here of citizenship. It did not. If Tarsus had been a Roman colony, which we've seen some of those, of course, on Paul's missionary journeys, if it had been a Roman colony, then being born in that would have made you a citizen. As a free city, it did not make you a citizen. So that meant that Paul's citizenship came sometime from somewhere else. No,
Study before we see that you can buy your citizenship.
we're going to see that here in a few minutes. So, because that's how the commander gets his citizenship. But
Doesn't that mean that either Paul's grandfather or father was was designated as a citizen?
someone in his family previous to him had to have been granted citizenship by the Roman Empire. That was done on at times of great city services being rendered, much like a city becoming a free city. Then someone either they accomplished something in battle or did some other great service, and so they were rewarded with Roman citizenship. But the key thing to keep in mind right now is that it is in his ancestry that it started, and not with him himself. Uh, so having asked if he can ask a question, what does Paul ask now? He wants to speak to that crowd. Why does he want to speak to the crowd? Because they've given him all kinds of bad names and he's not. So Paul's concern is simply his reputation.
No, he's still trying to teach them about Jesus.
Is looking for a chance, as always, to teach the gospel. And so even though this crowd, and this is, one of the more incredible moments in Paul's life, even though this crowd wants to murder him and have just done everything they possibly could to murder him and are standing there crying for his blood, his thoughts are, I've got another opportunity here if they'll just let me speak. One more chance to try and convince them about Jesus. So, yes, it's a defense, but the purpose of the defense is to the gospel. The only reason you don't get an invitation here is because he doesn't get to finish the sermon, as we've seen in other places. But that's exactly what he's attempting to do, and we'll see how that goes. How did Claudius respond to the request?
He granted him.
Granted him license to do that.
Why would he grant him license to do that?
Maybe he was curious. Thank you.
He doesn't know he's a Roman citizen yet. All he knows is he's a citizen of Tarsus.
I mean, Tarsus had been granted by the Roman authorities citizenship, though, right?
That's what I was saying a minute ago.
See,
They didn't grant them citizenship. They granted someone in Paul's family citizenship,
okay.
but the city was simply a free city, which basically simply meant that they got to rule themselves. They don't have a Roman governor. They have their own elections. All they have to do is support Rome if a service is asked of them. So if they go to war, they got to get soldiers, everything. All right, try and stay right here.
Yes.
Okay.
I think one of the reasons why we let him speak was because he was repeating that he was not the Egyptian and that he thought he.
I think he was curious as to why the people wanted to kill him.
This, obviously, if we hadn't had a week break, might have been a little easier for you. But remember, once he has Paul, the first thing he tried to do was what? Go back just a little bit before verse 37. If you're going to arrest someone, what do you need? You need a charge. He has no idea when he pulls Paul from this mob why they're trying to kill him. He thought that he must be this Egyptian fella. But if you remember, he asked them repeatedly, trying to figure out what Paul has done. And what kind of answer did he get? He got a bunch of different answers because most of them had no idea what Paul had done. And so he wasn't able to get that charge. So I think very much he feels like if it gives Paul a chance to talk here, and I do think it carries weight with him that Paul has turned out to be this educated person, far different from what he expected. But most of all, I think he's going to learn for himself what is going on here. And so he gives Paul the opportunity to speak. This is not a trick question, but it may seem like it if you don't pay attention to the underlying word. How does Paul first quiet the crowd? No, that's why it's underlined for you, Bob. The great hush happens when he motions with his hand. That's the great hush. Okay. Some scholars think that there's some miraculous involvement here. I'm with it, maybe. I don't know. It is at least extremely indicative that this is a screaming mob. And have you ever tried to calm a mob down?
Yeah.
It's not real easy to do. When people have their bloodlust up, they have their bloodlust up. Yeah. And so it's amazing that just the one they're trying to kill going like this would cause, quote unquote, a great hush to fall upon them.
By military at that time. So the the crowds realizing that their lives and well-being might be affected.
You might.
They had been trying to kill him the whole time. They're shouting for him to be killed now. Yeah, and he's safe, but they're still in a riot. It's still a riot. And you don't just go, especially if you're the cause of a riot like that in general, and have a great hush thing. You know, so some people think maybe God encouraged them a little bit to hush because of the significance, because this is it. You are 10 years away from AD 70 at this point, the total destruction of the temple. And a lot of people feel like, obviously Paul did, but a lot of people believe that maybe God did what was necessary to give that group one last chance, because that's exactly what it is. One last chance to open themselves up to Jesus as the Messiah. And we'll see that as we go in here. Now, here's your question, Bob. What language does he address the crowd in?
Hebrew.
Yeah. If you look at almost anybody commentary wise, they will have the comment here that he spoke in Aramaic. I don't agree with that comment. I always think it's funny that every version translates it Hebrew, and yet every commentator will rush in to tell you that it's Aramaic. What was Aramaic?
The common vernacular of the
Yeah, it is Hebrew in its roots, but it's not Hebrew. But most of all, the reason why I'm confident that he spoke actual Hebrew here is what happens when he does begin to talk to him that way.
They quiet down even more.
Get even more quiet. Aramaic was what they spoke every day in Palestine, which is why the commentators rush in to say, oh, he's actually speaking in Aramaic. If he was speaking in their everyday tongue, would it have such an impact on them?
No.
No, that would be what they were expecting. However, if he speaks in actual Hebrew, pure Hebrew, if you will, that language to them has become a sacred language. They hear it every week. You know where? In the synagogue. The scriptures are read in actual Hebrew. You see, so it is that sacred attachment that Paul works off of in addressing them in Hebrew right from the start. That's what, and remember, a lot of the crowd doesn't know what's going on anyway. So suddenly, someone in front of them is speaking to them in the pure Hebrew, and everybody tunes in to listen. And then you get that slide right over into chapter 22. So in chapter 22, brethren and fathers, hear my defense, which I now offer to you. And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew dialect, they became even more quiet. And he said, I am a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I really want to do everything I can to encourage you to be focused on what Paul is saying here. I'm a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, brought up in this city, educated under Gamaliel, strictly according to the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, just as you all are today. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and putting both men and women into prisons, as also the high priest and all the council of the elders can testify. From them I also received letters to the brethren and started off for Damascus in order to bring even those who were there to Jerusalem as prisoners to be punished. So how does he begin the address? What was that opening? Brethren and fathers. What kind of opening is that?
Specific.
Okay,
That's very friendly.
it's a very respectful way to open his speak. It's the way you would expect someone who was standing up in the synagogue and been called on to address them, uh, to speak. Who are the fathers?
I don't really the Sanhedrin.
The fathers would be the term. I reversed those questions in there, so I apologize. The fathers would be the members of the Sanhedrin, which tells you that there are members of the Sanhedrin in that crowd, which of course you would expect. Again, it's the feast week, and so I don't know if they're all there, but I know that some members of the Sanhedrin there. Who are the brethren? His fellow Jews. Yeah, he's using that term those for those of his race. Uh, we already talked about that one. What is the first fact that Paul mentions?
That he was a Jew.
Hold up a second. Dean,
So I think also that one of the reasons that he's trying to calm him is because he knows that they are no different than what he was. He
Absolutely.
was the same. He was persecuting. He did what the Sanhedrin told him to do, and he was very proud of it being Saul. So when he gets up to address the crowd, he puts himself, this is who I was.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing him enumerate each one. So what's the first thing? The first thing,
That he's a Jew.
I'm a Jewish man. Remember when Paul talks elsewhere about how he's a Hebrew of Hebrews and about how if anyone were to have confidence in the flesh, he most of all, tribe of Benjamin, etc., etc., etc. So, what's the second fact? It's a twofold fact. You've given me half of it.
Well, he was born, it says he was born in Tarsus,
Tarsus.
brought up in this city. This city, Jerusalem.
Just as Dean enumerated everything that he's saying here, you see, is to stylize himself, not just as a Jew, but as the epitome of Jews. So the only thing he could have got better here in their eyes would have been born in Jerusalem. He solved that quickly, though, by stating where he was born and the fact that he's such a prodigy, he is sent to Jerusalem early. So I was raised in this city. A lot of them who are there, in fact, the majority of them that are there were not raised in that city. They're the pilgrims from the feast, you see. So we want to talk about Jewishness. I'm a Jew. I was born in a very notable city. I was raised here. I got my training and education here in Jerusalem. And then,
I got the answer for that.
what is it?
He was educated under the greatest Jewish scholar at that time, Gamaliel. So he had a great education in the Jewish religion.
Gamaliel, as we talked about before, considered one of the top 3 or 4 rabbis of their entire history. The top one in recent history, been dead 3 or 4 years at this point, but very fresh in everybody's mind. And of course, his teachings being quoted all the time. So he's telling them, not only was I educated in this city, but I was educated by the most respected Jewish teacher in our nation at that time.
Gamaliel was the grandson of Hillel, who was probably Hillel and there's one other.
Yeah, it starts with an S. That's all I have.
Shammai.
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 Yeah.
They were the two
Schools of thought. Yeah. All right. So, what is the fourth fact that he mentions?
What he was learning.
That he was zealous for God.
The Old Testament.
Yeah, I've got all that cataloged under Gamaliel.
Did it?
He said it. Zealous, and not just zealous. For what? Think about what Gene said. Just as you are this day. So what is that?
He's saying, I used to be just like you are, right? As you are today, I used to be there, you know.
He's talking about zeal here. So he's actually, this is a compliment on their zeal that they're displaying for God. Everything else ties it into, yes, that's where I was.
There's a great scripture comes to mind right now. When you go to Romans chapter 10, he says this about these people. He's still trying to convert them. He says, brethren, starting verse 1, chapter 10, brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer to God is for them, is for their salvation. For I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God.
Absolutely.
Well,
Um,
Chris?
Yeah.
Also, at this time, trying to get my thoughts straight here. Paul had the inner concern for his people, and he learned his lesson well from Christ, because this is exactly what Christ would have done. This is exactly what Christ did on the cross. Even though he was being ravished, beaten, deserted, everything. I mean, he was by himself except for God and the Spirit. And here Paul is doing the same. He learned his lesson well, and even though he was beat by these people, even though he still held to his message. Christ died crucified, and he still loves you.
Absolutely. And just as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago about Paul's determination to go to Jerusalem, echoing Jesus's final journey in Luke's travelogue that we're studying on Wednesday nights. When I see him back when he first asked if he could speak to the people, I immediately think there of Jesus saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, even though he is being not just executed at the time, but being mocked and scoffed at the time. How does Paul refer to the church there in verse 4?
The way.
Remember, we encountered this early in the book of Acts, that was the terminology that was used very early in the church, and somewhat fitting for being in Jerusalem where that started and everything, for him to use that term and speaking to them. What is striking about the first part of verse 5?
That the high priests are involved.
Okay, why is that such a striking reference? They are there. Remember, we pointed that out already. So this defense is so weighty. It's so evidential that when they ultimately reject it, it's amazing because he does everything possible here, including being able to say, oh, there are eyewitnesses to what I am testifying. You don't have to worry about if I'm telling the truth or and exaggerating. You can turn to the fathers out there and you can ask them, and they can tell you that every bit of it is true. So that's very much, they can testify to all of that. What is he setting up here? He's setting up being able to state that he is still a Jew. Remember what I said in the introduction? You'd be both a Christian and a Jew. Uh, that's what he's setting up, and we'll see it played out. Uh, Here is one of those passages. This is Galatians chapter 1, but you can also use Philippians 3, 4 through 6 that I talked about, or 2 Corinthians 11, verse 2, where he says he's a Hebrew of Hebrews. But there in Galatians, he said, "You have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism. I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions, extremely zealous. Top of the class, then the most active, had the ear of the high priest, was able to get these letters directly from the high priest and all of that. So let's pick up in verse 6. We're almost at time. Let's look at verse 6. But it happened that as I was on my way approaching Damascus about noontime, a bright light suddenly flashed from heaven all around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me. Now, Lord willing, we'll go over this next week, unless the questions take us there. A large part of this we won't go into great depth with, because we went into great depth with this in Acts chapter 9. There are some connections I want you to be able to make. So uh, I will give them to you ahead of time, and then we'll be dismissed. But for example, in Acts 16, he's going to talk about washing away your sins and calling on the name of the Lord. Again, we went in depth about washing away your sins, so I'll just make like comment next week. But if you look at that phrase, calling on the name of the Lord, that phrase is very popular in the denominational world. However, the New Testament spells out what that involved for an alien sinner, and that included baptism. And I hear that phrase and its synonyms used constantly these days, and they're talking about and teaching the exact opposite of that. So you might go back to Acts chapter 2 and see where they're using that phrase, as well as here in 22. You can go back to Romans 10 and 13, et cetera, et cetera. So, Lord willing, we'll pick up there next week. Class dismissed.